Hey everybody! For my presentation, I decided to research Jim Henson and his influence on puppetry in film. So, this is my disclaimer slide because I feel like anytime anyone hears the words puppetry in film, they either laugh or like just assume that it's about Chucky, which is totally justified. But I think that puppets have a lot of potential in film outside of the horror genre, and so we're going to talk about Jim Henson's views on that and how he utilized puppets in the fantasy genre. And so, yeah, just put dead silence and child's play out of your mind for the time being because this presentation has nothing to do with little creepy little murderers. So, yeah. So basically, as I said before, puppets have a whole lot of potential outside of the horror genre. And you might not have even really put this together before. Like obviously you know that all of these are puppets, but these are some of the most iconic movie characters of all time and they're all puppets. And so it's really crazy to see how prevalent they actually are, like their utilization actually is. And Jim Henson had a lot to do with that. So that's kind of what we're going to explore. So as you can see E.T. and Yoda, Jabba the Hutt, that thing from the Never-Ending Story, Gizmo, Master Splinter, the Hobgoblins, and that thing from Little Shop of Horrors. So these are all, yeah, again, really iconic characters. And Jim Henson actually had a lot to do with their creation, and specifically Yoda and Jabba the Hutt. He was consulted on their design, and he actually recommended his colleague Frank Oz to act and voice Yoda. So that's kind of an interesting fact before we get into his biographical information. So, for those of you who don't know anything about Jim Henson, there's a lot to know, really. He wore a variety of hats throughout his career. So, he was a puppeteer, he was an artist, an inventor, a writer, a producer, and a director. So, he did a wide variety of things, and he was incredibly talented and creative. He lived a fairly short life. He passed away of pneumonia when he was only 53. So he was pretty young when he passed away, but he made a ton of, he accomplished so many things within his lifetime and just opened up this whole new world of opportunities within film. So his legacy is really incredible. So I just wanted to give you guys a brief timeline of his life. So he was born in Greenville, Mississippi, as the previous slide said, in 1936. And just in general, he's best known for his creations, The Muppets of Sesame Street, with which I'm sure you are familiar, The Muppet Show, and Muppets Tonight, as well as many feature films. And those are often a little bit different than his work on Sesame Street, but they're all really important for different reasons and important for different reasons to different people. So we'll look at kind of both sides of that. So this is the rest of his timeline here, and this is as brief as I could possibly make it because of everything that he dipped his fingers into while he was with us. So he began working on puppets in high school, and that was after a whole childhood fascination with television and show business. And this was just sort of his choice route into that world. And so while he was a freshman in college, he created this 5-minute television segment called Sam and Friends. And this is actually when he created the Muppets originally. This was like their sort of rough draft. This is when Kermit the Frog, who was actually considered Jim Henson's puppet alter ego, was invented. So this was sort of the birth of the Muppets. And this was just as he was a freshman in college. And by the time he was 22, he had already won an Emmy for this show. So it's pretty cool. After college, he worked as a commercial producer and he was very successful in that field. And then he developed a few experimental films as well. And none of them, did anything super worth noting, but that's sort of when he sort of found his niche and really got involved in the creative process. So he founded Muppets Incorporated in 1958, which is now the Jim Henson Company. And he joined the Sesame Street Project, which he would be involved with for 20 years, I think the next year, so 1959 maybe. And he helped develop a lot of the characters, so like Big Bird, Ernie, Elmo. He helped put a lot of those together and come up with like design their personalities as well as their physical attributes. So he had a lot of leeway there. And then he went on to produce The Muppet Show in 1976, which was a huge success. And he founded the Jim Henson Foundation and Jim Henson's Creature Shop. And then in 1988 and 89, he designed the puppets for, he directed, he did the screenwriting for both the Storyteller and the Jim Henson Hour, for both of which he won an Emmy. So those were successful as well. So these are sort of the three things that kind of set his work apart from previous puppeteers, previous directors. The three things that I thought were worth noting, anyways, were the fragmented elliptical storylines rather than telling a single linear story. And this is, I guess, most evident in Sesame Street, honestly, because you don't see like a consistent story there. It's kind of all over the place, there's a lot going on, and it makes it feel a lot more involved and a lot more ongoing than like, like the typical plot line, like rising action, falling action, etc. So that's something that kind of sets his style apart. And then another thing is his reliance on visuals. And this is also evident in what you guys have seen of him most likely, which is Sesame Street and the Muppets. I mean, the bright colors and so much going on and so much movement in the puppets. And one thing that was different about his puppets is the way he made their mouths move and the way that he made their arms move. He used rods instead of just having them be cloth, so that he could get the very distinct movements that he wanted to make them seem as lifelike as possible. So his reliance on visuals was a little bit different than everyone else's, and he just found different ways to play to that and to connect with audiences through the visuals. And then finally, his work was possessed of a playful spirit that often crosses gleefully into anarchy. And this is something that I think really sets him apart, because it's a difficult transition to make in a lot of cases. And I mean, he had Sesame Street, which is obviously a children's television show, and he also did segments on like the first season of Saturday Night Live. Like, he's just got like such a broad range of talent. And I mean, he used puppets for the SNL segments too. So it's like, I mean, he had one specific vision, but he had so many different like paths that he wanted to go down using that same vision. And I think that that's really impressive. So we were supposed to kind of approach this project from a couple different perspectives in like fields of study. So obviously I wanted to delve into the biographical / historical perspective. I think that's important with a research project, to just kind of have a background idea of who you're studying and why that person did the things that they did and what makes their work significant. So I already kind of delved into that a little bit. And then I wanted to talk about how I think his work pertains to education and the significance of that. And I think that the most important thing to note is his imagination and the way he utilized his creativity from the time he was an itty bitty kid and had this just total fascination with how TV worked, and then found this sort of route to sort of this bridge into that world through puppets, and just sort of kept building on that and just running with these wild, crazy, unconventional ideas, and how it worked for him. And I mean, that's what set him apart, and that's what got him ahead. And so those individualities and that distinct creativity is something that should be celebrated and taught within the school system. So that's something that I thought was important to note relating my topic to my major. So I wanted to talk about, since we already talked about the Muppets a lot and Sesame Street, which is probably his most notable works, I wanted to talk also about The Dark Crystal and Labyrinth because those are what make Jim Henson important to me personally. Because I grew up watching these films and they're a totally different concept than the Muppets and Sesame Street, but they're amazing in their own ways because they're things you've never seen anything like them. If you've never seen them before, you've never seen anything like them before either. I guarantee it. So, The Dark Crystal was made in 1982, and it was the puppets that Jim Henson designed for it were based off of the work of an artist named Brian Froud because Jim Henson wanted a completely different dynamic than the Muppets. And so this is how he decided to go about it. And his main objective was to just make this as real as possible. The puppets, the way that they move, the way that they operate, the way that they communicate, and the way that they tell the story is so realistic. It's incredible. And so that was his objective throughout this entire process. And it really shows how much effort to and attention to detail he gave this film. It's really incredible. And this one was actually commercially very successful, which sets it apart from our next film, which is my favorite movie of all time, Labyrinth, which was a commercial failure. But it got good reviews apparently. It just commercially was considered a failure. And now it's a cult classic. So, that's a glow up if I've ever seen one. Okay. Oh, I hate myself for that. Anyways, if you've never seen Labyrinth, I definitely think you should check it out. If you're a David Bowie fan, definitely check it out. It's got great music and it's just a really fun film. It's unlike anything you've ever seen before. It's just a good time. And I love this movie, and this is really why I appreciate Jim Henson's work so much and wanted to research him, is because of my affinity for this film. So, yeah. So, I thought that this was an important quote to include just because I think it really sums up well Jim Henson's contributions to the film industry and also like what his vision was and like who he was as a person. This came from the Jim Henson Legacy website, which the Jim Henson Legacy was founded by his wife. So, someone obviously very close to him with his best interests at heart. And so, you know that the mission statement is going to be something that was close to Jim Henson's heart. So, anyways, I'll read it for you. Established in 1992, the Jim Henson Legacy was created by family and friends in response to the extraordinary interest in the life and work of Jim Henson. The organization is dedicated to preserving and perpetuating Jim Henson's contributions to the worlds of puppetry, television, motion pictures, special effects, and media technology. By making Jim's creative body of work available to the public through presentations and exhibits, the legacy will share the power of his art, his imagination, and his positive view of life with generations to come. So I just think that that's really powerful, and it just gives you an overview of everything that he made and had an influence in puppetry, television, motion pictures, special effects, media technology. He had such a broad range of talents and also such a simple outlook. Like that's something that you see across all of his quotes and all of his biographies. It's one thing that's really clear is just like this simplicity, and he just wanted to inspire this positivity and this he just had such a positive outlook, and he wanted to share it with the world, and he wanted to share his creativity with the world. So I think that that's really a powerful message. So to conclude, I wanted to throw a few of his quotes in here, and I won't read all of them, but again, he just had a really incredible outlook, and I think that his work really projects that, and I think that that's something that makes it so timeless. And that's why, I mean, Sesame Street is still still with us. It's still ongoing, and all of his films, even though some of them were commercial failures, they've become cult classics now, and that's just because of his. I mean, he was such a visionary, and like his imagination, his these fantastic ideas of his, just he was able to bring them to life through puppets in a way that is impossible to do with animation or with strictly live action, because it just using puppetry just sort of combines these his talents of creating and being an artist and shaping and molding these characters and then bringing them to life and finding ways to make actors connect with audiences through them. And I think that that's what makes puppetry so cool. And that's why it has so much potential outside of Chucky. So, anyways, that is, I guess, the case that I'm trying to make with all of this, and then just bring attention to what a cool guy Jim Henson was. So, yeah, this is not relevant, but if you want to check out a spoof of a Stan Lee and Jim Henson rap battle, that's kind of funny. And then there's just some funny pictures that I found while I was researching that I thought should be shared with you because you deserve to see them. So, yeah. Thank you for listening.